Hi, I'm Izzy, and this is Dizzy Quilts and Sews. Today we are piecing block number 6, which is the double T, and we're going to quilt it once again with a free motion quilting motif. Let's get started. All right, so here is the block we are making this time around. It is called, I believe, the double T block, and it is basically 8 flying geese blocks arranged in like a T formation, and we've got plain background squares all around as well. So you need 2 fabrics for this, your colored fabric and your background fabric. I'm using this gray as my background fabric for this block, and the patterned fabric or the colored fabric I'm using is this here, which I absolutely love. Yeah, this is an art gallery quilting cotton, which is just amazing. You're gonna need, obviously, your backing fabric, so a 14-inch square of your backing fabric, and then a 14-inch square of batting to make this block. All of the cutting instructions, as usual, are in the description down right under this video. So go ahead, gather all of your supplies. You're gonna need your rotary cutter, a marking tool of some kind, a square ruler, a longer ruler if you have one, and then all of your fabrics. And we're gonna get started piecing our block. All right, here you go. So I've got 5 of these 4.5 squares, and those are going to be our corners and the center. So we're going to set those aside for now. I've got 2 5.25 inch background squares, and I've got 8 2 7/8 squares in my print fabric. And from these, we are going to make 8 flying geese. So here's how we're going to do this. Take one of the 5.25 inch background squares, take 2 of your colored little squares, and put 2 of them in the corners facing each other. All right, so we're doing that. Then you're going to take a ruler and some kind of marking tool, and you're going to mark a line from corner to corner across your colored fabric squares. So in effect, you're tracing a line from corner to corner and then corner to corner on your colored fabric. And you are going to stitch 1/4 inch to the left and then 1/4 inch to the right of this marked line. If you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, like I always say, take the time to mark your 1/4 inch lines on either side and then stitch on them, because you do need to be precise here. So you can prepare both of your squares before you go to the machine. All right. You can use any marking tool here. You're never going to see these lines. All right, so I'm going to take both of these pieces to the machine now, and I'll show you what we do next. All right, here we go. So we've got our 2 squares stitched down. Next, we're going to cut on the marked line. So right down the center. All right. And then you're going to take this to the pressing station, and you are going to press the little colored triangles here up and away from your background triangle. So basically you want the seam allowance to go up towards your triangles. So press this flat and then come back here. All right, here we go. Now we've got these funny looking shapes that look nothing like a flying goose. So the next step is you're going to take one of your funny looking shapes and one colored squares and put it in the corner, in the background corner, in other words. All right, and then take a ruler and your marking tool, and you are going to mark a line from corner to corner on your colored fabric. Right like this. All right. You see my line right down the middle? And you're going to do this for all 4 of your pieces. Like this. Take my ruler, mark a line right down the center. And then once I've marked all 4, I'm going to take them to the sewing machine, and once again I'm going to stitch a line of stitching to the right and one line of stitching to the left of my marked line. Basically stitching 2 lines on each one of these pieces. All right, so go ahead and do that and we'll meet back here. All right, here we go. So just like we did before, we're now going to slice this apart right on the marked line. Oh, come on now. There we go. And you're going to take everything to your pressing station, and you're going to press the triangle up again, making sure your seam allowance goes up towards the triangle. And look at that, just by magic, we're going to end up with with flying geese. So do that for all pieces. So cut them apart, press the triangle up, and then we'll come back here and trim these down. All right, so there should not be a whole lot to trim here because these should finish at about 4.5 by 2.5. So technically, all you should have to do is trim the dog ears or the little triangles. Now you can do that with your rotary, or you can just grab your scissors and cut those off for all 8 of these. All right, and take a minute to do that because these add a lot of bulk where your seams are already going to be pretty bulky. So just take your scissors and chop those off. If your flying geese are not 4.5 by 2.5, if they are bigger, then take a ruler and just trim them down to 4.5 by 2.5. You'll effectively be taking the dog ears off when you do that. If your flying geese are significantly smaller for whatever reason, your seam allowance was too big, or you made a small mistake when you cut your pieces, whatever it may be, if your flying geese are significantly smaller than 4.5 by 2.5, you might want to start over because these will need to get pieced into your block and the rest of your pieces just won't fit with them if they're too small. All right, here we go. I'm going to put all my little dog ears away. Now we're ready to start setting up our block. So we're going to start with our 5 corners, or 4 corners, I should say, and our center square, just like this. And then we're going to arrange our flying geese so that our background triangle here, the point is going towards the middle of our square. All right, there we go, like this. and this, and there we go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew our flying geese together to create the flying geese units. So basically put one on top of the other, and we're going to be stitching here at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, making sure that you stitch across the point here, but not into the triangle over here, just so that your point here stays intact. So at a 1/4 inch, making sure you stay away from the point that's right there. And do this for each 4 of these pairs. All right, here we go. I've got my flying geese units, and you'll notice my point here is intact and nice and crisp. So that's what you want to attempt. All right, and from here, it's basically the same thing that we've been doing all along. We are going to sew our squares into rows, and then rows together and make our entire block. So go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back here when you're done. And here we go. Here's our gorgeous double T block. So now I can assemble my sandwich by putting my backing fabric right side down, my piece of batting centered on top of that, and then my block on top, making sure I've got plenty of batting and backing fabric all around. And now we are ready to quilt this bad boy. But before we do that, like we always do, we are going to grab a piece of paper and practice our design. So the design we're going to make is another stipple. So the first block we did with free motion quilting, let me see if I can find that for you so I can show you. There we go. All right, so remember our friendship star, and the stipple we did was basically a meandering. So we're gonna do this motif's cousin today, and we're gonna do a square stipple. The only difference with the square stipple is that you can go over your stitching lines as you're going around your quilt sandwich. So let me just show you quickly with the pencil and paper what that looks like. So we're gonna start in one corner in the batting, and then start stitching straight lines and sharp angles. There we go, going around our quilt like this. So you might need to practice this a bit to get used to getting out of tight corners and then getting into smaller spaces. So take your paper and pencil and just start making some straight lines and sharp angles all over your paper, covering all of the white spaces. There we go. Now there are no rules, so you can travel quite a distance. Make your squares any size you want to. The only rule here is that you are going around in straight lines and sharp angles all over. So I started here and I covered all of this, and I was probably going to travel here and back out this corner. So figure out your strategy with your pen and pencil, or pencil and paper rather, before you bring your sandwich to the machine, and just keep going with the pencil and write it down in your memory, or build some muscle memory for getting around and then getting into tight corners and getting it out of those tight corners until you're feeling pretty confident. And then you can make yourself a practice sandwich with some scrap fabrics and scrap batting, and just practice moving your hands. This one is it's from a free motion quilting perspective, it's a little easier than the last two we did because there are no curves. So it's very easy to keep your hands steady and consistent when all you're doing is moving in up and sideways and then down and sideways again. The best point to replace your hands or move your hands around is when you're at a corner, when you're about to change direction. Just stop, needle down, and then start going in the new direction. And it'll all go well. So, pencil, paper, practice for a bit, then make a quilt sandwich for a practice piece, and then I'll meet you at the machine where we're going to start quilting it. Okay, so here we are at the sewing machine. I've got my quilt sandwich right here. I've got my doodle from before, and remember, we're doing a square stipple, straight lines, sharp angles, no curves in sight, and yes, you can definitely go over your stitching line. So I've got my free motion foot on the machine. I've got my feed dogs down so that they won't interfere with my ability to move the quilt sandwich under the needle. I've got my stitch length at a 0, and I've got a full bobbin. One thing you might notice if you've never done free motion quilting before is that it uses a lot of bobbin thread. All right, so we are going to start in the batting like we usually do. I'm going to put my needle down and then back up again. Pull up my, did it pull up? Hold on. I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread. There we are. Come on now. All right, let's try this again. Needle down, needle up, and there we go. I'm going to pull the bobbin thread up, and I'm going to try and keep the threads out of my way. I'm going to do a few stitches in one spot just to anchor everything. Again, if you have quilting gloves, I like to wear mine. I find it's so much easier, and I don't put nearly as much stress on my hands and my shoulders. So if you have them, definitely use them. All right, there we go. Remember, straight lines and sharp angles, and don't overthink it. Your angles don't need to be at a perfect 90-degree angle. Your lines don't need to be perfectly straight. Just go up and down and right and left. Trying to keep your stitching pretty consistent. The goal here is to fill as much space with quilting as we can. So trying to avoid leaving huge unquilted areas on your quilt sandwich. So I'm going to try and go back in the little nook and crannies that I left open and unquilted. And try to vary the shapes, or not really the shapes, but the sizes of the rectangles and squares that you end up quilting as you cross over the lines you've already stitched. Like some of my rectangles are very small, some are fairly large, some are squares. So just try to make it interesting by varying the size and the direction of your quilting lines. And if you find yourself stuck in a corner, you know, there's nothing wrong with a long straight line to get you to another area of your quilt. Whoa. Alright, we're almost done. This is really, really quick once you get the hang of it. There we go. And look how nice that looks. Again, in free motion quilting, it's more about the texture, because very, very few people are going to have their noses 2 inches from your quilt. So as long as it looks really good and you can almost feel the texture when you're looking at a quilt from a distance, that's the goal, really. We're not going for perfection here. As long as it keeps your sandwich together, you've managed a good job at quilting. There you go. You've got block 6 all done and quilted. And there you go, your double T block all quilted with the square stipple. How beautiful is that? All right. As always, if you have any questions on either the piecing or the quilting of this block, please leave those in the comments below or send me an email. My email address is always in the description box. Thank you so much for watching. Please give the video a like on your way out if you liked it, and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks again, and I will see you soon.